Hello, I'm Olly and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in August. So August was, of course, the month of GarbAugust, my annual reading event dedicated to reading trashy books. Hopefully you took part and hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. I've had a really fantastic time this August. I read a ton of books, which I'll talk about in this video, and just really enjoyed watching other people's videos as well, watching other people get involved in the spirit of GarbAugust and enjoy reading some trashy books. So a bit of housekeeping before I start. So firstly, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who's been involved in GarbAugust, and particularly my co-hosts. There'll be a list of all of those in the description for the video. Do check out their channels if you're not already subscribed to them. They've all really thrown themselves into GarbAugust and it's been great watching their videos. In particular, I wanted to call out Annie from the channel Obscure Book Adventures, who's put up a video pretty much every day, and they've all been really interesting. Some particularly interesting ones on kind of pulp magazines and trashy comics and things like that. So yeah, do check out Annie's channel if you're not already subscribed. And also wanted to reflect on the fact we published this month, Garbology, the GarbAugust anthology of awesome trash, which was huge fun to be involved in. So big thanks to everyone who submitted a story or artwork for it, and in particular to Troy Tradup, who did a fantastic job of editing it and pulling this book together. I really enjoyed the whole experience. It's been a wild ride, but really fun. A lot of people have been asking me if there's going to be a Garbology 2. And we are working through the details of that at the moment, so I can't give any guarantees yet, but keep your eyes peeled for an announcement video, hopefully soon, with details of what we're going to do in 2025. So that was Garbology. The other thing I wanted to say is, in these like GarbAugust wrap-up videos, I always announce at the end of it what next year's GarbAugust is going to be called. So stay tuned to the end of the video to find out what we're going to be calling GarbAugust 4. Right, let's get on with the books then. So we had a bingo card for GarbAugust. I'm not going to tell you which book related to which bingo square, because I'll just forget to do it and it will be a mess. But I did manage to complete the GarbBingo card. If you follow me on Instagram, I've been like ticking off squares on the bingo card each day as I read the books. And I did also manage to cover 10 decades. So I read a book from the 1930s every decade through to the 1920s. So that, you'll remember, was the third dimension of GarbAugust this year. Was the concept of reading across multiple decades. So yes, I managed to do that as well. So I managed to achieve my goals for GarbAugust. I didn't manage to read every book I said I was going to read in my TBR video. So there were 2 books that I didn't get to, both of which was like a conscious decision. One was Lady Godiva and Master Tom, which I just really didn't fancy. And then the other one was Hot and Badgered, the first of the Honey Badger Chronicles shifter romances. Now, I have read a shifter romance every year for GarbAugust until this year, but yeah, I went to read it, and it's longer than I thought it was going to be, and the reviews on Goodreads weren't great, and also suggested that there was no sex at all until right at the end. And when I did start reading the first chapter, and it was just kind of boring, so I didn't bother with that one. But I did, as I say, manage to still tick off all of the bingo squares and cover all of the decades. So let me talk through what I read, and I will do these in the order that I read them, and then as usual at the end I will try and remember to tell you my favourite book of the month. So the first thing I read then was Remember the Alamo by, who's it by? It doesn't even say. Kevin Randall and Robert Cornett. So this was a kind of sci-fi adventure book from the mid-80s where a unscrupulous oil company discovers that there's oil in Mexico, and they also discover a time machine. They manage to develop a time machine, and they send a group of like Vietnam veterans back to refight the Battle of the Alamo, so that they can in the future have that land. It was quite fun. It didn't have as much action as I would have liked, but it was pretty entertaining. After that, I read Blade Book 25, The Toran Pearls by Geoffrey Lord. This was a lot of fun. So this is a men's adventure series about this guy who's a British spy, and his bosses like send him into other dimensions to have like fantasy adventures. So it was very silly. It had lots of sex and action, and it was just fun. After that, then I read The Snake by John Godey. So this is about a 11 foot long black mamba loose in Central Park. So a fun animals attack book. It was like genuinely tense at times, but as I reflected, I think in my weekly wrap up where I talked about it, snakes just aren't that interesting to read about. They're not as interesting as like sharks or killer rats or killer slugs. Snakes just kind of slither around and then bite someone, and that's kind of it. So it was pretty entertaining, but not fantastic. After that, my first kind of proper dud, I think, of GarbAugust was A Killer Read by Erica Chase, which is a like cozy mystery. And it was okay, but I found myself less and less engaged by it as the book went on. The actual setup was quite good, which is there's this book club. They're meeting to discuss a book. There's a knock at the door. There's a stranger outside, and he comes in to use the phone because his car's broken down. And then minutes later, he's mysteriously died. So it was like a reasonably good setup, but I just felt it was too long, and I just got bored by the end of it, if I'm honest. After that, a book I really enjoyed for most of it until the end, which was just horrific. That was Verity by Colleen Hoover. This was a host recommendation from Kelly Hooked on Books. I really like the setup of this book, which is there's a very famous writer. She's had a car accident and she can't write anymore. She's kind of confined to bed and is like incommunicative, if that's the word. And her husband hires this kind of young writer to come and finish off the series that she's been writing. And like she moves into their house and weird stuff starts happening. There's obviously more going on than meets the eye. And it was kind of okay. But it was like the setup was good. And you get this thing where the central character discovers this. So Verity is the name of the bedridden author. And she discovers this this book, like an autobiography that Verity has been writing, and then proceeds to read it very slowly over the course of the book, despite knowing it's going to reveal secrets and interesting stuff. So it all felt a bit stretched out. And then the end is like A, really quite problematic, and B, just completely ridiculous. So yeah, I felt like the twist kind of ruined the rest of the book, if I'm honest. After that, a book by an author I'm coming to really like, Donald Goines. So this was Cry Revenge. So this is a book about a kind of drug war between two gangs in Chicago. Is it Chicago? I'm not sure if it is Chicago. I can't remember what city it's set in, but a drug war between two gangs. I didn't like this quite as much as some of the other Donald Goines books I've read, but then again, the end was fantastic. He has this way of making you care about the characters, even though you kind of don't realise you are, because they're often quite horrible people. But the end of this, really hit me. So yeah, and he's a really interesting writer, or was a really interesting writer. He died very young, and I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to work my way through his stuff. After that, an indie horror book that was sent to me by the author some time ago, which I really enjoyed. So this was Once More with Feeling by David Bryan, which is a cult-based book. So about this cult who invade the home of a family and kind of hold them hostage and do horrible things to them. And it was just a really tense, enjoyable ride, really graphically violent at times. It reminded me a lot of the horror author Sean Hutton, who I really like. So yeah, just a fun, nasty horror novel with some decent twists as well, actually. As well as this cult invading the house, there's also a serial killer operating in the area. So you get all sorts of stuff in this book. It was entertaining. After that, then I read some true crime, Killer Kids by Clifford L. Leyendecker. So as the title suggests, this is a book about a series of case studies of children who killed their parents. And it was okay. It was like super exploitative, as these things often are. And the thing I liked about it was Clifford L. Leyendecker did this fantastic thing where the first paragraph of each of these sections was just really overblown, like tabloid style. It really sucked you in. But then after that, they became less interesting. And there's something like slightly depressing, I think, about reading books like this, and particularly in a book about children killing their parents, because the reason most of these children killed their parents was like years of horrific abuse, basically. So it was quite depressing and unpleasant book, if I'm honest. But it still managed to keep my attention. After that, I read a V.C. Andrews book, albeit this one was written by Andrew Needleman rather than V.C. Andrews. Dawn, the first in a series, which I forget the name of now. This was just really, really entertaining, really over the top, but just fun. So about this young girl, like teenage girl, Dawn, whose family are very, very poor. Her father gets arrested for at the start of the book, like an undisclosed crime, and the family get broken up. And she has to go and live with this wealthy family. And it's just like it's kind of, rags to riches, like really melodramatic and over the top. And there's all sorts of stuff going on in this book. All sorts of twists around like the identity of various characters. Just a really, really fun ride. I do like V.C. Andrews a lot. After that, so that was all the stuff I think I read for the first week, which was Anything Goes week. After that, we moved into Category Romance and Men's Adventure week. So the first thing I read for that was Able Team Royal Flush by Dick Stivers, which was really fun. So this is Able Team are like this team of like tough guys, basically, from the US. And in this one, they go to the UK because a group of like Irish Republican terrorists have invaded Windsor Castle and are like holding the Queen and other people hostage. And they go in and kick their butts, basically. So it was just really, really entertaining. And then there's also a short story at the end of this about Mac Bolan, the executioner, about his time in Vietnam, which was even better. I enjoyed that more than the main story. So yeah, that was fun. Then read a less enjoyable book, TNT by Doug Masters. So the first in a series. These were originally published in France in French, and then translated into English and published in the States. So just very silly and quite offensive at times, about this guy who gets caught in like a nuclear test blast, and it gives him like superpowers, basically. Like he can see in the dark and stuff like that, and he becomes like an agent. And yeah, that's it really. It was a strange book. Right, so for Category Romance then, I read Extreme Caution by Jean Brochere, which is a NASCAR Harlequin romance, so set around the world of NASCAR racing. And this one featured a romance between an older couple, so both in their 50s, one of whom was the mother of a couple of NASCAR drivers, and the other of whom was a rich businessman, as the male characters in these books often seem to be. But just a really sweet romance. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice seeing an older couple in a romance novel. After that then, some more men's adventure. The Executioner book, something or other, I forget which number it is, 23. The Executioner book 23, St. Louis Showdown, or St. Louis. I did ask in a previous video how to pronounce it, and was told, and have forgotten. I think it's St. Louis, isn't it? St. Louis Showdown. I mean, it's another Executioner book. He goes to St. Louis, he fights the mafia there. It was fun. Some more Category Romance next. The final two books from the Colstrip of Montana series, which I've been reading over the last few months, along with Sarah from the Bookish Knitter and a bunch of her subscribers. So these are like Category Romance books, but there's an overarching mystery. So there were, I can't remember now if it was 6 or 8. I think there are 8 books in the series. These are the final 2 where you get to like understand the solution to the mystery that's been bubbling under throughout the series. P.I. Daddy's personal mission was about a private detective who's also like a single dad, and falls in love with, was it the librarian? I think it was his son's teacher. Falls in love with his teacher, so that was quite a sweet one. And then Colton Surprise Family has Damien Colton, who was a member of the Colton family who are central to all of these books, who'd been imprisoned in the first book for a crime he didn't commit and then got released. In this one, he falls in love with this woman who I think was a librarian, who's come back to the town. So a woman who'd previously lived in the town and had moved away, and has now come back. And yeah, like just another enjoyable romance. So all these books, I've really enjoyed the romantic elements of them. The suspense elements aren't quite as well done, but they're still fun reads. After that, then I read the book for the CriminOlly book club for September, for August. Yes, the CriminOlly book club for August. And apologies in this video, I'm still struggling with this kind of virus that I've had for a few days now. So if I'm not making any sense, that's my excuse. So yes, anyway, we read Schrader's Cord by Scott Leeds, which was really fun. So a new horror novel came out this year about like cursed records and stuff like that. So centres around a guy who's like a record executive whose father has died in mysterious circumstances, and he goes back to his hometown to investigate. And there's this whole thing around cursed records. The prologue to this book was fantastic. It features a private detective and the ghost of his dead wife, who are trying to like uncover something. At the start of the book, you don't realise what it is, but you learn as the book progresses. You learn more. So this was a really fun book that had a mixture of like alive and dead characters in it, and like a really interesting backstory, and it was just a fun cursed art kind of a read, and I really enjoyed books like that. After that then, so we've now moved into Sex and or Violence Week. So the first thing I read for that was Cherry Delight Hot Rocks by Glenn Chase, which is a pseudonym. What was he called? Gardner F. Fox was the guy's real name, and he wrote tons of like trashy books like this and loads of comics as well. So Cherry Delight is a female agent for an organisation called NYMPHO. NYMPHO stands for the New York Mafia Prosecution and Harassment Organisation. So like The Executioner, and in fact these books, as you can see at the top there, were called the Sexecutioner series. So like The Executioner, she goes up against the mafia. She uses her womanly wiles as well as guns and stuff like that. This was fun. So the first book of this series that I read was like just filthy, just absolutely packed with sex. This book like reined back the sex a lot and was just quite a fun globe-trotting thriller about the diamond industry. So it starts off in South Africa and then she travels, it ends up in Amsterdam. So it was just fun and kind of slightly saucy at times, but not like over the top explicitly sexy. So yeah, just a fun 70s read. After that then, a book from the 60s, which was completely shocking in terms of quite how graphic it was. This is, and even the cover is graphic, so I'm going to censor the cover. So it was The Image of the Beast by Philip Jose Farmer, who's best known for his Riverworld series, which loads of people seem to love. I've had loads of people in the comments saying how much they like those books. So this is a very graphic, very like explicitly sexual and very graphically violent book. The first in a series. I think there's 3 books in the series. And somebody told me in the comments it was originally published by a publisher who specialised in pornography, which, having read the book, makes sense. So it's about a detective whose partner is killed in a snuff movie that appears to feature monsters, and thereafter he is investigating and trying to figure out what's going on. But there's some very, very, very weird sex in this book. And my mind is still slightly boggled by it, but if you like the sound of that, I recommend it. You can get it on Kindle. Right, after that, another modern horror book. So this was one I read as a buddy read with one of my patrons, Chloe. The book was I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones, which I was slightly disappointed by, if I'm honest. I really, really enjoyed the previous books by Stephen Graham Jones I've read. This one didn't quite live up to those, but it was still a fun read. So it's about a guy who is growing up in Texas in the 80s, so he's like a teenager, and he becomes a slasher movie villain as the book progresses, basically. So it was an interesting concept, and there was some decent kind of coming of age type stuff in the book, but I just felt like it didn't quite knit all the pieces together in a way that quite worked. The coming of age stuff and the slasher stuff felt slightly jarring, especially as the central character was actually the slasher. So you have to kind of reconcile the fact that he's murdered people with feeling sympathy for him as he goes through the kind of pains of being a teenager. So yeah, slightly weird and didn't quite work, but had some like really atmospheric stuff, had a great sense of place. So yeah, they definitely had some good things about it. After that, some more trashy 70s stuff. So I read John Adams Samurai by Crystal Wood. So let's talk about Christopher Wood first. Christopher Wood, quite an interesting guy, wrote loads of different books under different pseudonyms, including the Confession series. So you may remember in February for the GarbAugust Wasted Weekend, I read Confessions of a Window Cleaner by Timothy Lee. So that is Christopher Wood. So the Confessions books are kind of bawdy sex comedies, basically. He also wrote the screenplay for the Bond movie Moonraker and a novelisation of that as well. And also wrote John Adams Samurai, which is a book with the same plot as Shogun, but which predates Shogun. So both of them based on the life of a guy called Christopher Adams, I think, who was an English sailor who travelled to Japan and became like a samurai. So just a fun historical adventure, quite heavy on the kind of sexual content, quite bawdy. It compares itself on the cover to the Flashman books by George MacDonald Fraser, and it's definitely not as good as the Flashman books, but that is a reasonable comparison. John Adams is a similar kind of character to Harry Flashman in terms of being quite lusty, but also basically a bit of a coward and often kind of takes the easy way out. So yeah, a very fun read. Right, we have now moved into novelisation, the final week, which was novelisations or books that were turned into 70s or 80s miniseries. So I read for that Super Mario Brothers by Todd Strasser, so a middle grade novelisation of the Super Mario Brothers movie from the 90s. It was about as good as that sounds. It was okay, but I'd definitely rather have played a Mario Brothers game for the amount of time I spent reading this book than reading the book. So that was a novelisation. I then read, and I had been reading this throughout the month. So the group read for GarbAugust this year was Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne, which was turned into a miniseries in either the 70s or 80s, I think, as well as being a movie. I love this book. I have read it before. I read it when I was in my early 20s, I think. It's just fantastic. So it tells the story of like a group of women who are all like in and around kind of the entertainment industry, and who come to know each other. And it follows them from, I think, just after the end of the Second World War, so kind of late 40s through to, I can't remember if it's the late 60s or early 70s, but over like 2 or 3 decades basically. And you really get to know them as characters. They go through like significant journeys as characters, and it's just, I mean, it is like super trashy. It's in particular about addiction, so the dolls of the title are like sleeping pills basically, that many of the women become addicted to, and it's just compulsively readable, but also really dark. Like the ending of the stories of at least a couple of the characters is just really bleak and depressing. And in common with Lace, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, by Shirley Conran, it's a book that has loads of sex in it and loads of like stuff about relationships, but is in no way romantic. Like there's no real romance in this book. Most of the men in this book are awful, and most of the romantic relationships might end up coming to nothing. But it was a really good book about like women succeeding, you know, women, or I guess women trying to succeed in certain careers and often managing to succeed, but also having like huge black holes in their souls basically. So yeah, a strange book, much more impactful than I expected it to be, even though I'd read it before. It is like on the surface super trashy, but there's definitely a bit of depth there as well, so I did enjoy that a lot. Next then, another novelisation, so the novelisation of the Hammer movie, Twins of Evil. So there seems to be this thing at the moment of, albeit this came out like over 10 years ago, but there's definitely a thing at the moment of people writing novelisations of old movies, which I absolutely applaud. I love movie novelisations, and it's great to see some new ones being written of older films. So this one of a Hammer film from either the late 60s or early 70s, about some twins who get, one of whom gets bitten by a vampire. Just a really fun read. It was quite long, but it didn't feel padded at all. Hudson uses these pages to kind of build up a bit of atmosphere, to tell the story, but also to layer an additional kind of layer of sex and violence on top of what was in the original movie. So yeah, fun, definitely trashy read. After that then, I read a Doc Savage book, Book 8, Land of Terror, by Lester Dent. this was a really fun one. This was probably my favourite Doc Savage book so far. It starts with Doc Savage going to, he's supposed to be meeting up with this guy he knows. He witnesses the guy getting murdered in a really bizarre way, and then like goes on a chase to chase down the gang that have murdered him. He like brutally dispatches them, basically, including on a pirate ship for like unknown reasons, really. It's taking place in New York, so he chases them across New York and they end up on a pirate ship. And the story then moves to an island that's full of dinosaurs. So it was just really silly, but really, really entertaining. I enjoyed it enormously. Right, on to Lace then, which I just mentioned. So Lace by Shelley Conran. Very much in the tradition of Valley of the Dolls, in that it follows a group of women, and it's just about their lives over like quite an extended period. And the hook in this book is there's these friends who are all at like a finishing school in Switzerland together, again just after, not long after the end of the Second World War, and one of them becomes pregnant. And now in the present day, or the present day of the book anyway, which is 1980, this young woman like approaches these women and asks them the question, which one of you bitches is my mother? So she is the daughter that was given up for adoption back in the 60s. Really, really entertaining. Like Valley of the Dolls, loads of sex in it. Not a lot of romance. Some very strange sex. But yeah, I had a really good time with it. It's 750 pages, but those 750 pages just flew by. So yeah, very entertaining. And then I finished up the month with a couple of crime novels and then some comics. So the two crime novels I read were both ones that filled in certain decades that I needed to read. So I read Count of Nine by Earl Stanley Gardner, which, if I remember correctly, was from the 50s. Just a fun, silly mystery. I said in my weekly wrap-up, it reminded me of like an episode of a silly detective show, and it definitely feels like that. So about this couple of detectives who are investigating the theft from a famous explorer of a jade idol and a blowpipe, and then someone gets murdered with the blowpipe as well. So yeah, very, very silly, but really entertaining. And the kind of like the reveal at the end of how the murder was done was fun. And then read a book which I thought was fantastic, The Screaming Mimi by Frederick Brown, which is a crime novel from the 40s, which features a serial killer, like long before serial killers were called serial killers. In the book, he's referred to as a ripper, who's going around like brutally murdering women in Chicago. And it's about a journalist who's also a drunk who witnesses one of these attacks at the start of the book when he's kind of at the end of a drunken bender, basically. He witnesses one of these attacks and becomes like obsessed with tracking down who the Ripper is. Just fantastic, really, really enjoyable. Frederick Brown's writing was fantastic, really like just fun. He had a fun turn of phrase, and he kind of injects himself as a narrator quite often into the story in a way. Sometimes that can be annoying when writers do it, but he did it with a real lightness of touch, and it was very, 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 very entertaining, and also just really like gripping. You really wanted to get to the resolution of the mystery. There were a couple of fantastic set pieces as well, so just a really, really fun read. So that was the final book I read, and then having finished those, I read a few Commando comics yesterday afternoon, all of which were fun, one of which in particular was brilliant. So if you don't know, Commando Comics were a series, a long-running series of comics over here in the UK, typically set during the Second World War. I think they might have done some First World War ones as well, but individual stories. They get one story per volume. They started in the 60s, I think, still going today. What they do today is they publish some reprints of old stories and then some new stories. So I've got like half and half here. So the ones I read anyway were The Secret Torpedo, which was an older one, which was about a submarine, which was fun. Simple Simon, which was a newer one, which was really entertaining. This was a very entertaining one about this kind of hapless guy who ends up in a prisoner of war camp, and just things keep on going wrong for him. So it was quite entertaining. Framed, which was another older one. This was originally published in the 60s, I think. 60s or 70s. Oh no, 70s. Originally published in 71. About these couple of guys like kind of behind enemy lines. So that was fun. And then the one that was fantastic was another new one, Agent Crime. I really enjoyed this. So this is about a female bank robber who gets like taken on by, so she gets arrested basically. And the deal is they won't put her in prison if she agrees to sign up to work for the Special Operations Executive, and then she goes behind enemy lines in France. Just really, really great, really gripping. And the central character, Sally Grimes, was just brilliant. She was really fun to watch. I would love to see a series of stories about her. Just completely entertained by that. Right, so that's everything I read in the month. Now I need to tell you my favourite book, and I've remembered I need to tell you my favourite book. So, I'm torn a bit. It was, as I went through the month, it was definitely going to be Valley of the Dolls, because I really enjoyed Valley of the Dolls enormously. I listened to it, I didn't say this, but I listened to it mostly on audiobook, and then read the final bit. But yeah, just fantastically entertaining, and a book that I think has really stood the test of time, despite being written in the 60s. It still stands up well today. So that was going to be my book of the month. But then I read The Screaming Mimi by Frederick Brown, which I'm now slightly obsessed by. In fact, it's a book I almost just want to start reading again because I enjoyed it so much. So yes, I think I'm going to call The Screaming Mimi my favourite book of GarbAugust 2024. And it was less trashy than it sounds. It was really very well written, but definitely trashy in terms of like being about a ripper, and like the cover and things like that were definitely on the trashy side. But yeah, really very entertaining. I do recommend it. I think I'm going to do a full review of it at some point. So that's everything talked about books wise. I promised at the start I would tell you the name of GarbAugust 2025. So GarbAugust 4, and what you may or may not know is every GarbAugust, apart from the first GarbAugust, has been named after a movie sequel. So the first GarbAugust was just GarbAugust. GarbAugust 2 was GarbAugust 2 Electric Boogaloo. GarbAugust 3 was GarbAugust 3 in 3D. There are many third sequels that were named 3 in 3D. So GarbAugust 4 is going to be GarbAugust 4. I'll start that again. So GarbAugust 2025 is going to be GarbAugust 4, the final chapter. Anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thanks very much for watching. Thank you very, very much for taking part in GarbAugust if you did. And as always, I forgot what I was supposed to say now. This virus is just knocking me out. Thanks for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're really good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.